I've run the floor at Callaway Mill for 6 years, and in 6 years I've trained maybe a dozen people who didn't last the month. So when Carol from HR found me at the number 4 loom on a Monday so what the parking lot had turned into a lake, and told me I was training somebody new, I didn't think twice about it. I figured it was another one who'd quit by Thursday. "You're training the new placement," she said. "Not a question. I've got a floor to run, Carol. You've got a floor to run and a new placement." She glanced toward the double doors, where a woman was standing in a coat too clean for this building, a canvas bag on one shoulder like she wasn't sure she'd be staying. 1 week. Personally. That's the request. Whose request? She didn't answer that. She just told me to handle this one carefully, tucked her umbrella under her arm, and left me standing there holding a wrench and an instruction I couldn't do anything with. I want to be honest about something before I go any further. I didn't like being told to handle anyone carefully. In my experience, that phrase means somebody upstairs is protecting themselves, not the person walking through the door. So when Mara introduced herself, firm handshake, a smile that didn't try too hard, some part of me had already decided what kind of week this was going to be, before she'd said a single real thing. "I was told to find Des," she said. "I'm guessing that's you." "Depends who's asking." "Just me." She looked past me at the looms, at the noise, at the gray light coming down through the high windows, like she was actually taking it in and not just being polite about it. "Where do you want me?" I handed her gloves from the bin by the door, the good ones, cracked at the knuckles, not the stiff new pairs HR kept in cases nobody ever touched. "Put these on. Nobody handles a thread unprotected on my floor. Placement or not." She turned them over like she was deciding whether to be insulted, then pulled them on anyway. Too big for her hands. She didn't mention it. I walked her the length of the floor without much talking at first, naming machines, naming stations, watching her out of the corner of my eye the way you watch someone you expect to disappoint you. Number 1 and 2 loom weaving upholstery wait. The dye vats past the second set of doors, where the air always ran 10 degrees hotter than anywhere else in the building. The finishing line, where Ruth ran quality checks with a hand loop older than some of the new hires. Mara kept asking the wrong kind of right questions, not the ones people asked to sound interested, but the ones that told me she was actually listening. Why the tension gauges mattered. What happened if a shipment came in wrong? Whether the noise ever stopped bothering you, or you just learned to talk through it. By the 3rd hour I'd stopped waiting for her to complain about the smell of hot dye, the way most first weeks did by lunch. At the end of the shift she handed the gloves back. "Keep them tomorrow," I told her. "You'll need them the whole week." "Just the week?" "That's what I was told." Something moved across her face, quick, gone before I could put a name to it. "Right," she said. "Just the week." She left through the same doors she'd come in by, and I stood at the window longer than I meant to, watching her cross the flooded lot without an umbrella, like she hadn't planned on being caught in the rain at all, like getting wet was a price she'd already decided to pay. I didn't know her name was already sitting in a locked drawer in the front office. I didn't know Carol had been told to keep track of where she went and who she talked to. I only knew that whoever this woman was, somebody upstairs cared enough to hand her, specifically, to me, not to a line lead, not to whoever had the lightest week. Me. I told myself it didn't matter. 1 week, and then she'd be somebody else's problem. I'd trained plenty of people who came through those doors looking lost, and most of them stopped looking lost by the 2nd day or they didn't come back at all. Something told me Mara wasn't going to do either. I locked up that night the way I always do, checking the tension gauges one more time even though I'd already checked them twice, because it gave me something to do with my hands while my head worked through a day that had gone nothing like I'd planned for it. Carol's request. The coat too clean for this building. The way Mara had asked about defect rates instead of asking when she could leave. I want you to remember that parking lot. We're going to end up back in it, and it's going to mean something very different by the time we do. If you've ever had a feeling about someone on day one that you couldn't explain and didn't fully trust, stay with me, because that flooded lot comes back later, and it changes everything I thought I knew standing in it that first morning. By Wednesday I'd decided the whole placement program was corporate theater. Some box HR needed checked. Maybe a favor for somebody's niece who needed a resume line. I didn't say that to Mara. I said it to Ruth, who runs the finishing line and has never once let me get away with a lazy opinion, while Mara was 2 stations away threading a bobbin faster than most first weeks manage by day 5. She's sharp, Ruth said, not looking up from the loop. You'd know that if you weren't so busy deciding she's not. I'm not deciding anything. I'm training her because I was told to. Sounds like a decision to me. I didn't get to argue it, because that's the morning Carol called an unscheduled meeting to announce a consultant, Renata Coble, from a firm none of us had heard of, would be walking the mill starting the following week to evaluate operational efficiency. I've heard that sentence before. Everybody on that floor has heard that sentence before, in one form or another, and it never once preceded good news. The room went quiet in the specific way a room goes quiet when 40 people start doing math on their own job security at the same time. Afterward I found Mara by the supply cage, gloves still on, watching everyone scatter with a look I couldn't read, not scared, exactly, but close to it in a way that didn't fit someone 3 days into a placement she could walk away from without losing anything. You know what that means, I said. Consultant walks in with a clipboard, half of us walk out with a severance letter. Maybe not. You say that like you'd know something. She looked at me, and for 1 second I thought she was going to tell me something real. Instead, I don't know anything. I've been here 3 days. 3 days, and you're the only trainee who's asked me our defect rate on the number 6 loom instead of where the bathroom is. Would you rather I ask where the bathroom is? I'd rather you tell me who you actually are. I hadn't planned to say it that plainly. It came out anyway, the way things do when you've been holding them longer than you realize. She held the gloves out toward me, like handing something back could end the conversation before it went any further. I'm the placement. That's who I am this week. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. Light, easy, but her jaw had gone tight, and she turned back to the loom before I could push it further. I let it drop. Partly because I didn't have the right to push. Partly because some old, tired part of me, the part that had been burned before by exactly this kind of corporate drop-in, the ones who smiled through their 2 weeks and forgot your name by the 3rd, decided whatever she was hiding wasn't mine to dig up. I spent the rest of the shift telling myself I didn't care what her answer would have been. I checked tension gauges I didn't need to check. I reswept a section of floor that Ruth had already swept, and Ruth noticed, and didn't say anything about it, which was somehow worse than if she had. At the end of the shift, Mara lingered by the time clock longer than she needed to, like she was working up to saying something and then deciding against it twice over. When she finally spoke, it wasn't what I expected. For what it's worth, she said, I'm not here to take anything away from anybody on this floor. Nobody said you were. You were thinking it. She wasn't wrong, and I didn't have a comeback ready, so I just watched her clock out and walk toward the doors, gloves tucked under her arm instead of on her hands for once, like she'd needed her fingers free for something. I was lying to myself about not caring, and I'd know it for certain by Friday. Thursday's shift ran long because a shuttle jammed on the number 2 loom, and by the time I got it clear, the floor had emptied out except for Mara, who'd stayed without being asked, holding a flashlight steady while I worked my arm into the housing up to the elbow. You didn't have to stay, I said. You didn't have to fix it alone. I got the thread loose, straightened up, wiped a smear of grease off my forearm with the back of my glove. In the quiet after the machines shut down, the mill sounds different than it does during a shift, the tick of cooling metal, rain still going against the high windows, her breathing close enough that I noticed it. Can I ask you something, she said, and you don't dodge it? Depends what it is. Why'd you take this job? The floor, not management. Ruth said you could have moved up years ago. I hadn't expected that question, and I answered it the way I answer things I haven't prepared for, honestly, before I could stop myself. My dad worked this floor 22 years. Same row of looms, near enough. When they offered me the desk job, it felt like walking away from something unfinished. I shrugged, like the shrug could take the weight out of it. Sounds sentimental. It doesn't. You didn't dodge that one. Good. My turn. I leaned against the loom frame, arms crossed. That call you took Tuesday, in the break room. You said, tell them I'll review it myself, like it was nothing. Trainees don't review shipping contracts. Her flashlight beam dropped a fraction, steadied, dropped again. It was a family thing. My dad's business. She stopped, started again. He passed in the spring. There's stuff still getting sorted. Lawyers call at bad times. That landed harder than she probably meant it to. I lost my own father 4 years back, and for a second neither of us said anything, the kind of silence that isn't awkward, just two people recognizing something in each other they hadn't planned on showing. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it plainly, without the reflex people usually tack onto it. Me too. About your dad. Sounds like this floor was his, in a way you kept. It was. She bent down and picked something up off the floor near the loom's base, a laminated badge that had slipped out of the visitor pass bin, half buried under a coil of leftover yarn. Not hers. Older, a name and photo worn thin by years of hands passing it back and forth. Whose is this? Leave it, I said, taking it from her a little too fast, a little too careful. Old inventory. Not important. She didn't push. But something in the way I'd snatched it made her go quiet in a different way than before, like she'd almost seen something she wasn't supposed to, and was deciding whether to let it go. If you've ever had a conversation with someone that told you more about them than either of you meant to say out loud, tell me in the comments the moment you knew someone wasn't who you'd assumed. I'll read every single one. Friday should have closed the week out clean. Instead, Renata Kogel showed up 3 days early, clipboard already in hand, asking to see line efficiency data going back 6 quarters before she'd so much as walked the floor. I pulled the numbers myself instead of handing it off to someone junior, and Mara stayed at my elbow through most of it, not because anyone assigned her to, but because, in her words, she wanted to see how it actually worked before somebody with a spreadsheet decided it didn't. Somewhere in that stretch of the afternoon, hunched over a printout in the supply office with the radiator ticking behind us, I overheard Carol on the phone through the half-open door, voice pitched low the way people pitch it when they don't want to be overheard and haven't checked carefully enough. No, the transfer isn't finalized yet, that's why we need her kept quiet on the floor until, no, I understand the board wants her briefed first, I'm not the one who. I didn't hear the rest. Carol shut the door. I didn't know what the transfer meant. I didn't know who she was. Some part of me told me not to ask, because whatever it was, it explained, handle this one carefully, better than anything I'd come up with on my own in 4 days of guessing. I looked over at Mara, cross-referencing loom output against Renata's efficiency numbers with a kind of focus that didn't belong to somebody just passing through a placement program on her way to somewhere else. You ever going to tell me what you actually do when you're not here? I asked. I'm doing it right now. That's not an answer either. It's the truest one I've got this week. She slid the printout toward me, finger tapping one column twice. Her numbers are wrong. She's counting scheduled maintenance downtime as inefficiency. That's basic upkeep, not a defect rate. If this reaches the board unchallenged, she'll recommend automation over a number that isn't even real, and it'll cost you 2 positions on this line alone. I stared at the sheet, then at her. You caught that. In an afternoon. I'm good with numbers. You're good with a lot of things you shouldn't be good with, 5 days in. She didn't answer that one at all. But she didn't look away either, and for the first time all week I let the silence sit there instead of filling it with suspicion the way I had every other time. Whatever she was, she just handed me the one piece of ammunition that might save two of my people's jobs, and right then, that mattered more than the question I still couldn't get her to answer. "Thank you," I said. "For this." "Don't thank me yet. Renata hasn't seen it. I trust you on it anyway." The word surprised me on the way out of my own mouth. They seemed to surprise her too, because for a second she looked at me like I'd handed her something she hadn't been expecting to be handed. Renata walked the floor an hour later with the corrected numbers in her hand, and if she noticed they'd been quietly fixed before they reached her, she didn't say so out loud. She asked sharp questions about throughput and left without committing to anything, which on that floor counted as a decent outcome. Mara watched her go with an expression I couldn't read, somewhere between relief and something heavier underneath it, like she knew the fight wasn't finished just because that afternoon had gone our way. "You think that's the end of it?" I asked. "No," she said. "But it buys us time. Time's worth something." I didn't ask her what she meant by us. I noticed it, though. I noticed most things about her by then, more than I wanted to admit even to myself. Chapter 5. The supplier crisis hit Monday morning without warning. A freight company called an hour before a shipment was due, said the truck carrying 3 months of raw cotton yarn had broken an axle 2 states away and wouldn't arrive for 6 days. Without it, 2 lines would sit idle by Wednesday, and idle lines meant idle paychecks. I was on the phone with the dispatcher, getting nowhere, running out of patience and out of leverage, when Mara held her hand out for it. "Let me. This isn't a training exercise." "I know." Her voice had changed, steadier, harder, none of the careful register she'd used all week around me. I handed her the phone, mostly because I didn't have a better option in the next 5 minutes. She gave a name I didn't recognize, not her own, with a title attached to it that made the dispatcher on the other end go quiet for a second before answering, and inside 90 seconds she'd secured a rerouted shipment from a secondary supplier at a rate that made him audibly hesitate before agreeing to it. She hung up, exhaled, and only then seemed to notice I was staring at her. "What was that?" I said. Not a question. A demand. "I fixed the yarn problem." "You didn't fix anything. You authorized something." Nobody hands a floor trainee authorization codes for a 6-figure emergency order. My voice had gone flat, the way it does when I'm angrier than I want to show, angrier than I had words ready for. "Who are you?" For a moment I watched her decide whether to finally tell me the truth, and I watched her decide against it, right there, in real time, in the half second it took her jaw to tighten. "I have contacts. From before. I used one." "That's not an answer, Mara. That hasn't been an answer all week." "I know." Her voice caught on it, barely, just enough that I heard it. "I'm asking you to trust me a little longer. I don't think I can do that anymore." I said it quiet, which landed worse than if I'd shouted it. I picked my tool belt up off the workbench and walked back toward the floor without looking at her again, without giving her the chance to say anything else that might have changed my mind before I was ready to have it changed. I didn't see what she did after that. I only know, because she told me herself much later, that she stood in that office a long time with the phone still warm in her hand, the same phone that had just solved a problem no ordinary employee could have solved, thinking about something her father told her the year before he died. That she'd never really know that floor unless nobody on it knew who she was. She'd taken it as instruction. Standing there Monday, she said, it started to feel less like advice and more like a warning she hadn't understood in time to use it right. I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was that whatever trust I'd said out loud on Friday, I'd just taken it back on a Monday, and I wasn't sure either of us knew how to get it back to where it had been. Ruth found me at the end of that shift, wiping down her station, and asked what happened. I told her the truth, which was that I didn't know what had happened, only that something had, and that I'd walked away from Mara before I could find out what it was. Ruth didn't tell me I was wrong to walk away. She also didn't tell me I was right. "You going to ask her again tomorrow?" she said. I don't know. That's not like you. It wasn't. I'd never once been a man who let a question sit unanswered when I had the nerve to ask it outright. But this felt different, like asking again might get me an answer I wasn't ready to carry. Something's about to break wide open on that floor, and it isn't the loom. If you want to see exactly how it happens, and whether I forgive her for it, hit subscribe now, because what happens next changes everything you think you understand about her. Chapter 6. The all-hands meeting had been on the calendar for weeks, nothing to do with any of it, a routine quarterly update, the kind most of the floor treats as 20 minutes off their feet and a chance to sit somewhere that isn't standing at a station. Renata Kobel was scheduled to present her final numbers. Carol was scheduled to introduce a guest from the board. I sat near the back, arms crossed, 3 rows behind Mara. We hadn't spoken since Monday, for days of passing each other on the floor like two people who'd agreed on a truce neither of us wanted. Carol took the floor first, looking more nervous than I'd ever seen her in 6 years of watching her run these meetings. Before Ms. Kobel presents her findings, I want to formally introduce someone most of you have already met this week. She gestured toward Mara. Following the passing of Arthur Voss this spring, ownership of this mill transferred to his daughter. Please welcome. The payroll clerk in the front row, not knowing anything hadn't already been announced, said it before Carol could finish, loud enough to carry across the whole room. Ms. Voss, ma'am, congratulations, we're so glad you're finally. The room went still in a way I'd only heard once before, the day layoffs were announced 2 years back. Every head turned toward the woman we'd all spent a week training, feeding gloves to, sharing lunch tables with, teaching to read a tension gauge like it mattered. I didn't move. I didn't trust myself to. Mara stood, and for the first time all week she didn't reach for a deflection, didn't turn it into something lighter than it was. My name is Mara Voss. My father owned this mill for 30 years, and before that, his father ran it into the ground and built it back up twice. I asked to come onto the floor without anyone knowing who I was, because I did not want to inherit a company I'd never actually touched with my own hands. That was selfish of me in one specific way, it meant lying to every person who was kind to me this week. Including all of you. Her eyes found mine, just for a second, then moved away before I could give her anything back. I'm sorry for that. I'm not sorry for what I learned. Renata's report never got presented that day. The meeting broke apart into murmurs and half-finished questions passed row to row, and I was already walking, fast, toward the side exit before anyone could stop me and ask what I thought. It wasn't the ownership that got to me. It was the week. Every honest thing I'd told her, about my father, about the desk job I never took, about a grief I hadn't said out loud to anyone in years, handed over to somebody who might have been quietly weighing whether I was worth keeping around the whole time. The trust I'd said out loud on Friday sat in my chest now like a bad trade I couldn't undo, no matter how I turned it over. I kept replaying the moment Carol said, Ms. Voss, turning it over the way you turn over a bad tooth with your tongue, checking to see if it still hurts the same way twice. It did. Every time. I went straight for my toolbox. I had it half-packed, standing at my locker in the equipment room, when Ruth found me. You're not actually quitting. Watch me. Because she's rich? Because her name's on a deed? Because she let me stand there and hand her my whole week like it was nothing, knowing the whole time she could have stopped me. I shoved a wrench into the box harder than it needed. That's not a hidden identity, Ruth. That's a test. And I failed whatever it was checking for. I was 2 steps from the loading dock doors, rain hammering the roof the same way it had that first Monday, when Mara caught up to me, no coat, hair already damp, gloves still on her hands, the same cracked pair I'd given her 6 days before. Des. I've got nothing to say to the owner. Then say it to the trainee. I'm still wearing her gloves. That stopped me, one hand already on the door bar, rain finding the gap under the loading dock awning and spitting against my boots. It wasn't a test, she said, breathing hard from catching up. I didn't come here to check whether you'd pass or fail anything. My father told me, right before he died, that I'd never understand this floor unless nobody on it knew who I was, and I believed him, and I didn't think through what that would cost the one person who actually let me in. That's on me. Not on some evaluation I ran on you without telling you. You let me tell you about my dad. About the desk job. You knew who I was the whole time, and I didn't know the first true thing about you. You knew the truest thing about me, she said. You just didn't know my last name. I've never told anyone what I told you Thursday night by that loom. Not people I've known for years, not people who've known my last name since the day I was born. I turned to face her fully, rain loud on the roof above us, the dock lit that same flat fluorescent it had been on day one. Renata's report. The 2 positions on the chopping block. Is that still happening? Not if I have anything to do with it. And now I do. She held up the phone she'd used Monday, the same one that had ended what trust we had in the first place. I'm calling the board tonight. I'm rejecting the automation plan and pushing a retooling schedule instead. That's not a favor to you. It's the right call, and I finally get to make it out loud, as myself, with my own name attached to it. I looked at her a long moment, the gloves, the rain, the woman who'd apparently been telling me something true every single day, just never the whole of it, never all at once. I'm not unangry, I said. I'm not asking you to be. I'm asking you to stay long enough to see if I meant what I said in that meeting. What happens to Renata's report if you don't stay long enough to make that call? I asked. It wasn't really about Renata. We both knew that. Then I make it anyway, from wherever I end up standing, she said. But I'd rather make it from here. Next to you, if you'll let me, not instead of you. I thought about my father then, the way I hadn't let myself think about him all week except in the pieces I'd handed her by that loom. He used to say a floor tells you who somebody really is faster than an office ever could, because a floor doesn't care what's on your business card. I'd believed that my whole life. Standing there, soaked through, I realized I still did, I'd just been applying it to the wrong person's business card. I set the toolbox down. Didn't pick it back up. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't forgiving someone, it's deciding to stay in the room long enough to find out if you should. If this one's got you feeling something, send it to somebody who needs the reminder that the truth, even late, still counts for something. The holiday floor gathering happens every December, same as it always has, folding tables dragged between looms, string lights clipped along the rafters, a sheet cake somebody's cousin always brings that never survives past 7 o'clock. This year the number 4 loom had been retooled instead of retired, exactly the way Mara pushed the board to approve, and Renata Cobal's automation plan sat wherever rejected consulting proposals go to be forgotten, unmourned, by anyone on this floor. I found Mara near the same supply cage where she'd once told me she wasn't going to answer my question. She was holding 2 mugs of the bad break room coffee and handed me one without me asking, the way you hand something to someone when you already know they'll take it. You didn't have to come to this, I said. You're the owner. You could throw a real party somewhere with real chairs. I like the folding tables. That's a lie. It's a small one. She smiled, the same way she had that first day, not trying too hard. I came because I wanted to say something out loud, in this exact spot, since you gave me gloves here once and I never thanked you properly for them. You're the boss. You don't have to thank the help. You were never the help. You were the only honest thing about that week. She reached into her coat and pulled something out, the same gloves, cracked at the knuckles, a size too big, the ones she'd worn every shift since that first Monday and somehow never given back. I kept these. I think it's time you had them again. I took them, turning them over the way she had on day one, and for the first time all season let something show on my face that wasn't guarded, wasn't measured, wasn't the version of myself I usually kept for this floor. I meant what I said on the dock. I'm not unangry. I know. I'm just less angry standing here than I was there. I'll take it. She lifted her mug, a small, ridiculous toast with bad coffee under string lights that had been strung the same way every December I could remember. I don't want to run this place from an office I've never sat in. I want to be down here. With the floor. She stopped, and this time didn't deflect it, didn't turn it into a joke to soften the landing, with you, if that's something you'd actually want, and not just something you're agreeing to because I sign your paycheck. You don't sign it. Payroll signs it. Des. I want it, I said, plainly, no sarcasm behind it for once. I've wanted it since a Thursday night by a jammed loom, if we're being honest, which is apparently a thing we're doing now. She laughed, a real one, nothing careful about it, and set her mug down on the supply cage shelf. Then here's what I'm proposing. Not a corporate placement. Not a week. I'm staying on this floor 2 days a week, permanently, whether the board likes it or not, and you're going to keep teaching me things I don't know, and I'm going to keep making sure nobody pulls an automation card on this crew again as long as I have a say in it. Ruth passed behind us with a paper plate of sheet cake and didn't even pretend not to be listening, which was about right for Ruth, and for this floor, and for the 6 years I'd spent on it before any of this happened. And the rest of the week? The rest of the week, she said, I was hoping you'd have dinner with me. As Mara. Not the placement. Not the owner. Just the person who still can't thread the number 2 loom without you standing over her shoulder telling her she's doing it wrong. Outside, the December rain had turned to the first thin snow of the season, catching the string lights through the high windows the same way gray daylight had caught them the morning we met, 6 days and a whole lifetime ago. I pulled the old gloves on, just to feel them again, and reached for her hand instead of a wrench. Yeah, I said. I'd like that.